In the presence of a gravedigger and an Anglican priest, Private Leon J. L. Brayan was buried in a pauper's grave in Geraldton, Western Australia, unbeknown to his family and forgotten for more than 50 years. It was through the painstaking work of two historical researchers that Private Brayan's final resting place was discovered and later recognized with an Australia War Graves headstone. His story was discovered as part of the Guildford Anzacs, a project that aims to record the impact World War I had on the town of Guildford, which is now an outer suburb of Perth. Project coordinator Barbara Dundas was joined by Geraldton-based researcher Dion Marinis, who was involved in finding the wreck of a RAF fighter that crashed off the coast of Broome in 1944. Ms. Dundas said when they came across Private Brayan, they found his story harder to trace than others. The Guildford Anzacs project has been going for 4 years and that is 750 soldiers, she said. With Leon there were more unanswered questions. I simply could not establish his exact date of birth and I could find no obituaries to establish his time and place of death. After poring through documents in Australia, France and Ireland, the pair traced Private Brayan to Geraldton, where they found his grave in a sandy corner of the Anglican section of the Geraldton Cemetery. The story just unfolded at each stage, Ms. Dundas said. Once we knew more of Leon and we knew where he was buried, we found his grave was unmarked and this just seemed a travesty. From the French Navy to Western Australian, Private Brayan was born in Saint-Malo, France, in 1883 where he trained as a Navy cadet, before enlisting in the Merchant Navy as a teenager. But for reasons unknown, Brayan deserted the Navy in Havana in 1907 and moved to Western Australia 5 years later, where he married Clara Maud Jones and had 2 sons, Leon and Geoffrey. More of our Anzac Day coverage: incarnations of a digger, from old soldier to young veteran, all my mates ever got was a wooden cross. Greek villager recalls how Anzacs saved him from execution during Battle of Crete. Chinese Anzacs still fighting for recognition decades after being lost in history. Anzac hero buried in pauper's grave in Geraldton recognized more than 50 years later. As many as 12,000 Anzacs could lie in unmarked graves in Australia. When war broke in 1914. He immediately enlisted in the 8th 16th Battalion and fought at Gallipoli, where he sustained a gunshot wound to the head. He returned to Guildford in 1915 a changed man, suffering blinding headaches, and was awarded a Bravery Medal for his actions. Protecting the motherland, Private Brayan spent a year recovering, before re-enlisting and rejoining his unit in France in 1916, and what Ms. Dundas said was to protect his home country. It seems horrendous. This man with blinding headaches and other problems, he had difficulties coping with noise, re-enlisted and went over to France, Ms. Dundas said. Private Brayan was charged with desertion and was demoted from corporal to private, a charge he vehemently denied. In 1917 he suffered serious injuries to his right leg during a grenade attack in the Battle of Hindenburg and was taken as a prisoner of war. He spent the remainder of the war as a POW before he was returned to Australia in 1918. In 1922, Private Briand separated from his wife, changed his name, and began searching for work in country towns. He lived an itinerant life, and in his later years, Briand was nicknamed Frenchie when he moved to Geraldton. He died at the Shamrock Hotel in 1960 and was buried the next day. Lest we forget, the diggers left unmarked through their research, Ms. Dundas and Mr. Marinis tracked down Private Briand's granddaughter, who was living just 60 kilometers away from where he was buried. Mr. Marinis said she was shocked when they found her, but grateful to attend the service in her grandfather's honor. That was pretty amazing, especially because she spent most of her time in Ireland and had only just come back to Australia, he said. To find she was living 60 kilometers away was amazing. Mr. Marinis said he would continue searching for those lost during the war to give their families closure. It is to do with the respect for the men who lost their lives, he said. It is important for me and important for history. Ms. Dundas said if Leon's story was to mean anything, she hoped it would inspire others to look for lost diggers. What I am really hoping from this is that other people will look at their families, she said. To see if perhaps there is another missing relative, another missing veteran, and see if perhaps they need to have their grave identified, lest we forget.